Hello and welcome to Geekatplay Studio. In this tutorial, we're going to look at how to drive the ecosystem with functions. How we can create actually not a surface ecosystem, but one that is three-dimensional. Using this, you can create your own custom plants, or you can create your own waterfall or a mountain of objects just based on the ecosystem. To understand this more, let's start by creating a basic cylinder as our first object. Then we'll just go in here and make our object a little transparent at about 60% so we kind of can see what's happening inside. And next we'll also convert this to an ecosystem so we have an ecosystem layer. And now we'll go inside and just add a rock. Make it a little smaller and then we'll populate it. And this is what happens normally when we populate an object with the ecosystem. They go just on the top. Normally, if you need to drop it a little below, you can specify that here, below surface, like 1.2 meters. You can see that now they are all in the same plane, 1.2 meters below the surface, but there is no variety in height. So now for future information, our cylinder is about 10 meters tall. But there's this other tiny button down here, Drive with Function, and it will open our function editor, and we have this tab, Offset from Surface, and this node here is our constant number, so we'll delete that. We don't need it, and we'll go in here and add a noise node, and inside of the noise node, we'll drop the scale down to 0.2, so it's very fine. Then we'll select this connection and we'll add 1 and then 2 of these filters. So now we'll change the function in this filter to multiply. And the second one will change to offset. And so you see now how this color has changed right here, and this will affect the altitude. So let's first look at our multiply function. What this does is, based on this noise, with the black and the white and the grays, are the altitude. So if you multiply it by 10, this increases the differences. And the effect on our population is to spread them up and down by 10 units in here. And it just makes them change the location in that z-axis. So if we go back inside and we want a bigger effect, we multiply it by 100. So instead of just tiny bits of change, you'll see this happening. They're spread all over, up and down from our center point, which is the surface. So now we're working more with 3D, allocating them up and down instead of on just one plane. And that's the effect of that noise node. Now you could go back here and instead of the noise, you could use a mapped image that you created before. So you could create a 3D image based on what you put in there. But for now, we've just selected this at 1 and we kind of understand what multiplication can do. It increases our range of up and down. The objects will appear. So now let's look at offset. Offset gives us the positioning from the point that we indicate. Usually this is from the surface, and if we want to move it down, all we need to do is set this offset a little bit down. So you'll see that if I made the value 100, it will become white, and they will all be above. And if I type minus 100, it's black, making them all below. So if I go here and make minus 50, you'll notice that it will be darker and make this tending more towards the negative. So if you populate it, and then we'll take a look at this, you'll see that they are spread more evenly through the sphere. Not above it, where it appears 100 and down here's minus 100, and that minus 50 line is about right in the middle. So in this case, you can kind of change how they're located, how they end up scattering through in here. So the range is the multiplication and the offset is the center of that range. Now here, we are populating inside that object, which is very nice. But when we create something, let's save this as our ecosystem right now. So we have this material here. And now just name it ecosystem for now. And we'll be able to use this in other projects. Now, let's just delete this cylinder here, and now let's load something, our Diplodocus. And I want to show you a bit how this can be applied for something that you might see in real life. Let's see if you can guess what it is. We'll put him here. Just kind of put him this way. We'll lift him up and then use the drop button to make sure he's on the ground plane. And we'll just adjust the camera here, moving it closer, getting a good view of him. So now we'll go in and load this material that we just used. And we'll populate it. And you can see these rocks are kind of going all over the place. So now we need to minimize it. So in the multiply filter, we'll probably want to reduce that to 50. And we'll go in the offset and make that maybe -5. And now let's do one more thing. Let's remove the rocks and add plants. The summer cherry tree will serve our purpose. Okay, in density we'll remove decay near foreign objects, and then we'll increase the density. Checking other things. And now let's go populate it there. Okay, so you see there isn't that much green on there because our density is too low. So I'll put it up to maximum. Then we'll reduce the scaling. And there still isn't as much as I want. Quite there. So one thing that is interesting about this, sometimes it doesn't populate as well as we like. But since we have this material assigned like this, we'll go to clear, and then we can click on paint and use that. We'll select the paintbrush. And let's zoom in here so we can see that better. And what is actually happening is that we're painting over and inside like this. It's using that same function in the random placement. And there are a few other things. We'll clear that again. We'll set this direction to form surface at perpendicular and change the rotation to all axes and maximum. So the trees will be kind of rotated a little and go inside. So we'll just add more trees here. And we'll zoom in a little closer. Also, if you don't like the trees growing, you can disable this pressure button. And we also can remove the limit density. And let's just go on here. On to the tail. Now along the neck a little bit more. Okay. And let's preview this to see how it looks. So you can see how these trees look like bushes growing around him. Think you know what it is now? The next thing we want to do is to go in here and choose a material that will apply to our Diplodocus, and we'll use the metallic grid in displacement materials. And if we go into the colors, we'll modify them to make them look a little greener. And let's look right here. probably want to add a few more trees. Reduce the scale and just go in here to the blank spots. And maybe a few more on the edges at the corners. The legs, actually. So the legs are a bit more populated. So here it is, our dinosaur topiary plant. And with the offset function, we specified how far below it can get. You can actually specify that a little more and paint here at the leg, or specify it to be less if we paint at the neck and tail. So with these functions, the multiply and offset, you have some control as to where the ecosystem objects end up. And you can make this something like a geopet, or maybe use flowers and make it a float in a parade with all these wireframes that we used. So now, let's bid adieu to our dinosaur and work on something else. So we are going to make a mountain of objects. So let's go select a cone, flatten it out a bit, just move where it is, and now we'll assign to this cone our material. So if we're populating our material, so now it's dropping a little below, and we don't want that here. So let's go in here and go to our density right here, and maybe say instead of -50, we'll go to -25. Click populate. So it goes a little more around, a little less below our object. And now let's go for fun, remove this rock, and let's add something else. Let's use these shells here. And you know, if you wanted to, you could maybe use skulls to populate that. So now when we populate it, we probably should increase the scale for this. Let's abort that operation and increase the scale here, and then we'll populate it. And that will make it a little bit faster to preview, but there's still too much, so we'll go even larger and then increase the density. That's just about right. But let's make that scale even a little bit bigger. So here is a mountain of shells, and this is truly 3D, so we can go around it with the camera. A few settings, rotate it from all axes and maximum, and set the direction to perpendicular, and we'll pop up that density all the way and the scale too, and also increase the scale here a little bit. And let's go to our submaterials and increase the transparency so it's totally invisible. So I'll populate it this way, and now let's render a preview. Here is our true 3D mountain, not just on the surface, but full of those shells. And instead of shells, you could use skeletons, you could use rocks, really anything. You could use a pile of gold, maybe some gold coins, like a pirate's treasure, or a dragon's treasure. So let's see if we can populate with an even bigger size. And yes, that looks really nice here. And because you're populating this with the ecosystem, if you used plants, they could respond to the wind. And they will respond to other parts of the environment as well. So now let's destroy this one and on to our next example. And this is just another cool magical type of creation that we're making by populating things through the Y or Z axis. So we'll create a cylinder, and let's make it a little bigger so it's easier to see. Now double time click to open the material, and let's add the ecosystem similar to what we did before. Edit the function in density, and I think that is okay. It's the offset from surface function we need to work on. Remove that node, add 1, 2 filters, and a fractal node. We'll just make these settings down here as small as possible. You can use a fractal node for this, or like before, we could use a noise node. It doesn't matter. Really, it's just whichever one you prefer to work with. One gives something smoother and the other gives something a little rougher. So in this filter node, let's set it to offset, and this one will go to multiply. And let's multiply it by 50. And let's go to offset and make that minus 50 for now. Okay. Add rocks. Populate. And let's actually increase the transparency so we can see what we get a little better. Yeah, we do need to increase that. So we'll go in here and increase the scaling so the rocks are quite large. Then we'll increase the density so we'll have plenty of them. We'll edit our function, and let's go here and maybe set multiply to about 200 and make the offset at minus 150. Okay, that looks interesting, but we probably need more offset. Multiply is 300, and offset will be minus 250 now. That is about what I want to achieve. Of course, you can have more if you want and make the offset at minus 300, so we'll go down a little more. And then I think I'm just going to manually drop it down. I want it to just go that way. And so if we look at it now, we have our column of rocks that are all jumbled up together. Someone once asked how to do this rock column. The problem is if you're using the terrain to do this, you can't easily make these rocks go along a vertical surface as you've seen. You could maybe create some kind of material, and I want to maybe look at how to do that in some kind of displacement material. But you can see how very cool this is already looking. And we can use different shapes to do this, so it doesn't have to be just a column. So now let's go in here and add a plant. And we'll probably just go and bring in some grass. And maybe we'll add another plant, this Vitex agnus castus here. And then we can go into scaling and increase the rotation, let it go more perpendicular from surfaces. And with the populate, you can see that it's adding this stuff. It reduces the rocks, so we'll just increase the presence of the rocks even more. And we'll decrease the presence of this grass. There. Now we have these rocks. And that's what I'm looking for. And you can see these plants are kind of peeking out, but I don't see them enough. They're kind of lost in there. So our solution here is to paint them in. Because we like the density of the rocks. We don't want to change that. Use only the selected items, and then we'll bring in a few more of those plants into the column of rocks. Just go around here and put as many as you want. And see how they're staying inside the circle very nicely. And if you look, they're being added around the bottom and the middle of the column as well, going with that distribution with those functions that we put. And they're coming in through that y-axis in 3D. And now let's preview this and see how it'll look. And you can really now see the plants growing between the rocks now. And that's really nice how that's worked out. So let's go into our materials and go into our rock. And here we can add another layer. And I want to bring in the vegetation. I want to do just this simple thing. We'll increase the alpha boost on that layer and reduce the altitude range and increase the fuzziness. We've done this before. Remember how we created some very complex rocks with veins going through them? You can do exactly the same in these. All that I'm doing here is just adding some greenish moss or algae onto the rock. So let's set this to object standard, and you can pre-create your complex materials and load them into this so it looks more interesting. So you get this more life going here. These rocks are not in a desert. And if you want, you can always say, hey, this looks very awesome. It's so awesome that I want more of them. So we're going to go in here, save this material. So we go into our cylinder, and on the right bottom is our option to save. Not the project, but just the material. So let's call this rock pile. Now, next time we do this, you can actually use the ecosystem to populate those ones if you want, or you can just create more. So we'll just put some more cylinders in here. We'll change the sizes and add some variety. Just kind of arrange them. So let's load in the material. And it's populating now for us. So we can go in here and adjust it. Just check to make sure our filters are working. Maybe in multiply, we want to make that 350. So you can see how we can populate all of them with this ecosystem material. And we'll go in here and do this with all of them. Some of them you can see don't go all the way. That is simply because they are larger than our first cylinder. And the fix is easy. In the multiply, we increase it to 450, and in offset, it's minus 450 as well. So you can see this one is populating more. And we can just drop the cylinders down into the ground plane so these rock columns aren't floating all around. And I'm liking how that's looking now. So let's bring in our ground, and we'll make it melted rocks. And I just want to move the sun a bit up front so I can see this a little better, have the light shining on it. And let's add a cloud, some fog right in here. I'll just kind of make it how I want. And let's go into the atmosphere editor. Let's add some clouds there too, and just bring in some generic clouds. Now let's see what we have. And it turns out I don't really like those clouds, so we'll decrease them and decrease the density and the opacity so they become a little more transparent for us. And we'll move these clouds back a little bit. And also the ground. Let's have something else. I think we'll have rocks and plants. On our main camera, we'll move it down and make it so that it's looking a bit up. We're looking up at the rocks that are kind of overlooking on us. So let's go to our final render and see what we have. And here's our final render. And you can see these very mystical rock columns. We could have a more interesting effect if we tried more textures in them and blended them. Maybe had one rock with these others going around and had it encapsulated. What I wanted to show you here, you can see how they're kind of hanging, and you can increase the density and put roots between them inside the plants. One other thing I want to mention, if you apply a complex shape and you want to do this right here, you can specify how many units it goes up and down and what offset you want to use. And that is the easy part, but how much density you can force into the ecosystem population is a little bit harder to control. So sometimes you need to modify it with the painter, but that turns out to be a good solution to use with these new functions that we've worked with. Thank you for watching this tutorial from Geekatplay Studio. For any questions, resources, more tutorials, and to join the forum, please visit us at www.geekatplay.com or www.vututorials.com.